Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With us today is Chris Rossini, our co-host. Chris, welcome to the program.
It's great to be with you, Dr. Paul.
Very good. You know, in a little bit, we're going to start our regular comments that we like to start off with, and we'll be talking about climate and, you know, the serious problems we have with climate and what we know how to handle. But before we do this, I want to remind all our viewers about our partnership with Birch Gold. This week was an important week for gold, and I had several calls. People come in, you know, gold, I think it was below 1,700 for a little bit, but now it's popped up and it recovered rather quickly, and it's very volatile. There's no doubt about it. So, but I had calls in and say, you know, is this a good time to buy? My answer is that over the years, I've been looking at this just a few years back, since the 1960s, even before the Bretton Woods self-destructed. But no, I think about a lot of, I sort of have come to the conclusion, and I'm not in the investment advising business. I do research and report, so I'm not telling people what they do and how they do it. But generally speaking, somebody taught me this a long time ago, that if you have money and you can use it for investment, outguessing the timing sometimes is very difficult. I decided I was one of those that I couldn't stand the testing. Oh, I don't want to buy today, I'm going to buy tomorrow, I'm going to sell today, this sort of. But some people are good at it. But you know, if somebody wants to, you know, study a little bit more, there's a free report available. And the number is on the screen. So if you dial this number, this free report talking about gold and the importance of gold, you can get this report by just clicking on to that number. Okay, Chris, I want to go into our first item today, and that is, you know, the radicals are really scaring us to death. You know, there's a climate crisis coming, and people are frightened, so they say. But we have found out that when you start doing a little statistical study, and that about 1% of the people are really terrorized. But see, they thought what they could do is just turn the switch on and terrorize the people over the climate, and like they were able to convert a bad cold and a few other things into hysteria over COVID. And this is something, though, is important, because there's a lot of money spent. There's bits and pieces of truth about you know, climate control and the mess that we have. So I think it's really worth studying and thinking about it, because we've more or less have come to the conclusion that if there is a problem and the government gets involved, they either caused it, or if they caused it and they want to correct it, it's going to get much worse. And even if it's a point of nature and they get involved, there's not much hope that the government's going to come up with a solution. Mises always made the mention that when you allow that to happen in a bureaucracy, they write regulations and there are unintended consequences they never dreamed of. But his argument was, if you do a regulation, you're bound to create two new problems. So you have to write two more regulations, and that's of course why the Federal Register is thousands of pages long, and nothing seems to change no matter which party is in power. It just keeps on and building. But this whole idea that they're going to do something with climate and solve this problem, I think it's way out of control. But in a way, Chris, it just may be that they see what they're doing as being very successful. Because what if they're part of the effort to cause chaos in our streets? Was there really an intellectual reason why we had this horrendous lockdown over COVID? But we did have chaos. We had a lot of mess in the streets. And if you are concerned about wokeism and the movement toward cultural Marxism, believe me, chaos is not a fault. They don't think, oh, it didn't go like we wanted. Maybe for some people that's not everybody who's concerned about the environment or inflation or whatever. But the people who orchestrate the policies, they have a goal. because otherwise it's unexplainable. Why would the government do these crazy things? What about the efforts by our administration right now dealing with inflation? And look at what the president's done. Oh, the oil prices went up when you cut off all the supplying and the drilling and more regulations. And then, the prices went up. Oh, it's Putin's fault. It's Putin's fault. But I think people who are behind that kind of policy, they can't be that removed from reality, thinking that what they're doing makes sense. But we hear one of the Secretary of Transportation the other day was that inflation is good for the problems we have. It'll make people conserve. And of course, that's a bunch of nonsense, exactly opposite of what the market wants. The market wants to say more freedom, more productivity, the better and more honest distribution of wealth and the conditions that we like. So that is a big fallacy. But to me, the big question is, are we going to move toward depending on and promoting all government solutions now about, the climate, we can handle the climate, or are we going to say, even that might be something that the government need not get involved with? I, for one, I don't sit around worrying about it because, some days are hot and some days are cold. And, I believe in a lot of this control, but I believe it comes through a thermostat. That's what you need. You need a good thermostat, and you can be comfortable. But if you have a government that says, no, we're going to solve the real problem, it's CO2 and get into all this stuff, they will make it much worse, and that will become the problem. That certainly was the major problem of COVID. And that is not to say that people didn't get COVID and people didn't get sick, but I tell you what, I sincerely believe the problems have been much worse because all those booster shots that Pelosi and Biden have taken didn't seem to help protect them. And we do know that natural immunity is better. So this whole thing, whether it's climate control or whether it's treating bad colds and COVID viruses, believe me, there's a much better answer found in the cause of liberty than there is by where are the bureaucrats that we need to solve these problems? Well, someday, Chris, they'll have to wake up because what is happening now isn't doing so well, and the monetary system isn't doing so well. So they will have to wake up. People are waking up, but they still don't have a grasp on what has to be done and where the real inflation comes from. Chris.
Right, Dr. Paul. And, government has no shame. They did such a great job with the COVID emergency that they now want us to surrender everything to a so-called climate emergency. And unfortunately, as we all know, propaganda works a lot of the time. We know from all the useless wars that have been fought that have done nothing but bury our country in debt. We know of the last few years of COVID propaganda and tyranny, but it doesn't work all the time. They've been trying to get this climate fear for decade after decade after decade. It's gone under so many different revisions and names. At first it's too cold and too hot. They're settling now that the climate is just changing. But fortunately, despite all the propaganda that we see every day about it, people just aren't falling for it. And Dr. Paul mentioned that 1%. That was from a New York Times poll, of all places. They ran a poll and just 1% of Americans named climate change as the most important problem facing the United States. But, so the Biden administration looks at that 1%, and what did they decide to do? Declare a climate emergency. Biden is going to use his executive powers to fix the weather. And if this was, and we're not gung-ho about Republicans, but if this was a Republican where 1% of people care about this, and he's declaring, executive powers, they'd be calling him a dictator, around the clock. But no, Biden gets a pass. He's going to be the executive that's going to fix the weather. And, it should be obvious to people this is about, like COVID, it's about control. Control over our lives, but it's just a different excuse. It's that, they're going to fix the weather. And that is, boy, would that be a bad excuse to surrender your liberty in the belief that government is going to fix the weather somehow?
We have the same problem going on right now. At the moment, it's not as severe as it was during COVID. And that is who speaks for science and how do you debate science? Well, you know, the people who were promoting all the vaccinations, all these things, they wanted to define science, and there was no such thing as a debate, and there was no way to know the absolute truth other than what they said. So that meant everybody had to have vaccinations, and there was no such thing as natural immunity, and little kids should get the shots anyway, and they're preparing for the next epidemic, and the kids are going to get these shots. But you know, up until a year or so ago, they didn't talk about climate change. The picture wasn't quite so big. It said, oh, it's warming outside. I often wondered why they kept talking about warming, because, you know, I was raised in the north, in Pennsylvania, and came down here in the 60s, both because of the military and my medical practice. And one thing that fascinated me was, you know, the fact that you could have grapefruit trees in your yard and oranges. And there were farms in the Houston area that were, you know, commercial, and they raised these crops. You didn't have to go down to the valley. I don't think there's any of those businesses right now right in the Houston area. And I know that all of my trees have frozen. And so, but that was in the middle of, you know, climate warming, you know, and we had to do something about the warming. But all of a sudden they quit talking about it, and they wanted to talk about climate. The big picture was different because the statistics didn't fit their scenario. They were showing that the average warmth that was coming was not a big deal, so they switched it over to the climate. But I think right now we're going to hear more about global warming because we've had a hot spell, and I guess a few people didn't have their air conditioners fixed, and they're hacked off about this. But anyway, that's it's just propaganda. They have their goals, and if this is a tool of the Greenies, that's a whole political system. They're part of the cultural Marxists, and their interest is not the people. If they were, the most important thing you can deliver to the people would be a society that respected and protected liberty. That would mean they really are concerned. No, they're protecting power, and they want to run things, and they will paint it like they're the saviors, because they will say, you know, we need to fight these wars, and those are the real wars, because we have to fight for peace and prosperity, and we're going to save democracy, and we have to defend our Constitution, and none of that is true. All these wars, how has any of that been achieved in Ukraine right now, or Vietnam, or in Korea, or in the Middle East? It was always the same excuse. We got to promote our values. We got to promote democracy. And of course, the more I think about it over the many years about democracy, at the beginning when I first found out that the founders didn't even like democracy, and it's never even mentioned in the Constitution, that all of a sudden it's incessant. I bet you if you listen to any of the MSM news, they're going to mention democracy many hundreds of times every day. And of course, it's the dictatorship of the majority that we should fear, and we have to change the scenario, because right now things are in change. People say there's a big reset coming, and we're involved in it, and what does all that mean? And I think it is important, but if they don't know what it causes, you know, these problems that we face, like the lockdowns for COVID, it's a philosophy of our government, where we turn over too much authority to special groups, and they end up controlling Congress. They end up controlling finances. The investment system gets, very, very much involved. And this ESG is a big thing. That the investments are dictated that way if you follow things politically. And lo and behold, what has he created? Big corporations, social media, all these groups, they're locked in with the radical left, and claiming, and some of them don't believe it, but but those who are in control, and they can get the subsidies they want, the Federal Reserve, the way they direct credit, and the bailouts, all this is important. So just for survival purposes, a lot of these corporations get into it. But a lot of them believe this baloney, and it's a big thing, and this is just one part about it. So if they get away with this, and the 1% get forgotten, or the 1% turns into 90%, we're in big trouble. But fortunately, most of the time, the people make more sense out of these things than the government. The government has ulterior motives, and that's why the founders worked very hard to keep the government very, very small, and the people, very much involved. Unfortunately, we do not have that today, but there's no reason why we have to give up striving for those conditions.
Very good, Dr. Paul. And I want to touch on something that you mentioned earlier. If climate change were a real problem, and there are people that really believe that it is, well, there is an iron law that you could count on, and Dr. Paul even mentioned this. Government would just make it worse, even if it was a problem. We always hear, oh no, we need bold and historic government action. Well, it should still be fresh in our minds, all the bold and historic action they took against COVID, right? Not only did they not fix anything, they created tons of new problems on top of COVID. So then we had to deal with COVID and all the new problems that government added on top. So, looking to government to go fix what you believe to be a problem is the wrong way to go. And if you believe in climate change narrative, be as bold as you individually want to be. Eat the bugs, live in a pod, ride a bike, don't have kids, all the recommendations they make. If that's your belief system, then, have at it. Just keep the government out of it and keep other people out of it, other than trying to persuade them. We believe in liberty, and we're trying to persuade other people to believe in liberty too. Government is force. Government is not meant to be, it's not persuasion. It's not meant to be a tool that you use to make other people just like you and to live just like you. Unfortunately, too many people do view government as a battering ram to make others like them. And as we mentioned in our title, that is the real emergency, the loss of liberty.
Very good. They're talking about this emergency, climate emergency, and then they have to find people to blame. And whether it's COVID or the climate or any other problem, the word they like to use, and they still use it, and they're very careless in using it because I imagine most of the time they use it, it has no meaning anymore, and that is that a person who supports a position. So if you support the position that, natural immunity is something we should, think about, because all medical students up until recently, they were taught about natural immunity, and they say that, we have to do this because otherwise it'll get totally out of control, and that's why they say we have to do it. And the word they use is terrorists. And how many politicians who are just in disagreement, and we're in disagreement back to some of these regulations on COVID, they called them terrorists. And the politicians that they really love to hate, the ones who have a truthful answer to the shenanigans that are going on, they are the real terrorists. So that's to destroy their credibility. And then they go ahead and set up the stage for doing all the things they want and try to control all the legislation and all the innuendos. But the policies do most of the time under today's conditions, backfire. If you had a policy that guaranteed that the Federal Reserve was going to be audited and they couldn't inflate the currency and they couldn't monetize debt, that would be a policy that would be good, but it would be eliminating bad policy. That would be the point there. Just think of all the things done regarding COVID and all the regulations that were done. I don't know which regulation was beneficial. They work hard to find something. And the one that is probably really the silliest, once if you hear the speaker and the president getting COVID, and other famous lefties, when they come down with a case of COVID, they said, well, they had the vaccination. Oh, they had their booster shots too, and they got it. Oh, that's good. That's good because they didn't get as sick as they could have been if they hadn't had all those shots. But they never look and find out the statistics of the people who never had any of that nonsense, didn't get sick at all and didn't have to go through this, and the risk of taking some of those shots. But whether it has to do with COVID or the monetary system, if they don't want to correct the policy, what they do is they come and tinker. If inflation, for instance, one of the worst things they could do is have wage and price controls, because it just clinches the whole economy and locks down the economy. So those are the lessons that are available to us. History can show this. The principles of liberty are based on moral principles, and they're also very practical too, because if you want to look at the statistics, the freer a society is, the more prosperous it is. The more authoritarian a society is, the poorer it is. All you have to do is look around the world today, or look at the cities in the United States. Look at the big cities or the states that are much more authoritarian. But so far they're getting away with it because they still have access to the federal treasury, and they just say they make their case, and since it's all leading to chaos, and that's what some people have, they continue the process. But there's no evidence to show that the more authoritarian a society is, the healthier and the happier society is. Otherwise, people would have been just so delighted with the Marxism of the Soviet system. Well, that finally ended because it self-destructed. So that is what we have to point out in order for people to at least talk about this. And one of the worst things that came out of the COVID thing, except for maybe 10 doctors who became well known and got on TV and wrote books, they may have lost their jobs, but there's no discussion. And I've said it many times as I was going through medical school, the debates over illnesses and the different approaches, that was a big deal. And we had these seminars where we get two well-known professors really go at it. But that's not the case now. The case now is if you don't believe in natural immunity, you're a terrorist and you're killing people. And they've used those terms. So, but let's hope this 1% is saying, look, you're overdoing it. We're skeptical now about, all about this on COVID, and we're pretty darn skeptical about, this whole thing about climate control.
Excellent, Dr. Paul. I will finish up. I believe that the climate emergency, quote unquote, is meant to be the forever emergency. For the most part, the COVID tyranny came to an end, for the most part. But, climate tyranny will never end if people buy it. And, fortunately, a vast, vast majority of people are not buying it. As that New York Times poll pointed out, only 1% believe that this is the most important problem. But if people ever did fall for this, there will never be a time where government would say, okay, we fixed it. The climate is no longer changing, I guess. That day will never come if people buy into this. If they are allowed, the government and their, pet corporations, to monitor every move, every product, every transaction in order to make sure that everything is climate friendly as they define it, then they will never, ever give that up. But there's good news. They may think that this is inevitable, but they also thought that there were things inevitable during COVID. They were trying to make us show passports to go to a ball game or to go get a hot dog at a restaurant. And shame on all those corporations that actually tried to implement that. Those stadiums for the ball games, the restaurants, a lot of them were forced to. But shame on them for actually trying to impose that here in America. But you know what? In the end, they did not get their wish, or not getting their wish of vaccine passports. So there is, that is a very good thing to latch onto. They may have all these crazy plans for everyone, but they are far from inevitable. It just needs enough people to be vigilant enough to protect their individual liberty.
Excellent. That's exactly our goals. And we should do whatever we can. But we also need help in doing this. Keeping our program going is one thing that is beneficial to us in getting our message out. But everybody has a responsibility. I claim that if anybody has come to this conclusion and agree, in general of what we've been saying, that you have a moral responsibility to spread the message for your own sake, for your family, for your friends and neighbors, and because it's good and because it's the right thing to do. But it isn't up to the individual. And some people feel overwhelmed. How can I do it? I'm just one person. And ever since I have not been actively campaigning, I keep meeting a lot of people. People have their own radio shows and doing videos and all kinds of writing. And they're promoting this liberty. There's no way that you can tell how much good you're doing if you spread a message. Because if you convince one person to say, you know what, that is right, I really believe that, there's no way to know what that individual does. He might get one person a day, but he might become a writer and get people by the hundreds. That is what really counts, not what's going on in the universities, because not much good is happening. But the resistance is building with the people, and we do have organizations that are teaching the right thing. But back to this whole thing about preparation for this emergency, I think Chris makes a very important point. But this week, maybe it was today or yesterday, I read, we're really in trouble now because somebody came up with COVID and monkeypox together. And that'll scare you, and that's not to belittle, the disease, but it's great propaganda for their side of the argument. And you do wonder about these stories, but people can't. It isn't even on the radar. A lot of people about it, other than the fact that every once in a while they'll get a report on the news. But they are preparing for the next emergency, the next pandemic. The states were asked to be prepared. Now, this is the one I really don't like because I think it's 49 out of the 50 states went and bought up and ordered all these vaccines for the next pandemic for the kids. Probably they shouldn't even be getting it. They don't even know what the emergency is going to be like. I think Florida was the only one that rejected it. We're not buying this stuff because we're not going to likely ever use it. But fear is easy to build up. And the other thing I think that is a driving force today, when you look at all the court cases going on and all the kangaroo courts, is the propaganda that happens, the Department of Justice, that to try to sort some of this out. There are some lawsuits going on right now to try to, as the dust is settling, to try to defend oneself because of the harm done with some of these regulations. So people are waking up. Conditions are better now as far as the number of people waking up than it was 2, 5, 10 years ago. Certainly in the monetary issue, there are a lot more people waking up. That doesn't mean that we're on the verge of a major victory, because so far the toughest converts to produce, getting a convert in Washington, D.C., that's a different problem, and they still have a lot of power. And the worse the conditions get, the more they cling to their power and the more determined they want to turn, the problems, and they end up, anybody really objecting, if they call them a terrorist and committing treason, what they do is they're really hating those people. So fear is there, but there's a lot of hatred out there, and it's built on that because, quite frankly, if you go take the numbers and you do it on an individual basis, and I think it's the fault of some on our side, conservatives and libertarians. Some say, with a broad brush, sweep everybody. But on a one-to-one basis, I didn't find that to be true. There were a lot of people in Washington. They did their political duty because they are on a committee and they went along with it. But deep down in their heart, they really weren't as nasty as they appeared, and they would have reasonable conversations. That was one of the reasons I had the Liberty luncheons while I was there, because we had people with different views that came, but it was all off the record, and we got to know each other, and it was much better. So I'm not pessimistic on the fact that we can't get converts. Over the years, I have been much more impressed with the number of people who have come across this message and have joined in, and many of them through my previous activities. I'm amazed at that, and nobody will know if there were 10 or 20 or 2,000 or whatever, because the message is spread. It's a remnant idea. There are people who have clung to the principles that we hold dear, whether they're economics or moral principles, and it's something that we can't say, well, we lost 100,000 this week, we got to do this. And you've got to sort out the propaganda from the truth. So seeking truth, of course, is on the top of the list for all of this. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.